Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the show tonight, fuel prices, cooking oil prices, now even milk prices skyrocketing at a time when the pandemic is not over, countless citizens desperate to make ends meet. What about all those election vows of the government promising to control inflation of the BJP? A few years down the road, just where are we with that at one of the most trying times in anyone's history? Next up on the show, a key interview with the chief scientist of the World Health Organization, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. Clarity on when Covaxin will be cleared or not by the World Health Organization, whether vaccine passports are fair or unfair, and whether the Delta Plus variant is indeed an international worry. But first, whenever you hear the word inflation, it's something that keeps repeating, and people often believe that, look, if it's here, if there's a price rise, it'll go away, as it often does. But if you actually look at the situation now in India across many segments, we are possibly in deep trouble at a terrible time as we are in this pandemic. These are numbers for the last 6 months in Delhi alone. Petrol presently at 98 rupees 8 paise a litre. That's up 15 rupees a litre. In 6 months, it was 83.7, it's now 98.8. Inflation, diesel, up 15 rupees a litre, used to be 73.9, it's 89.2 in Delhi. LPG prices up a whopping 140 rupees a cylinder. It used to be 694, it's now 834.5. Amul Gold, milk, the price of milk has sharply gone up. From 56 rupees a litre, it's up now to 58 rupees a litre as well. Lots of reasons for that. But that's something that affects any number of people. Mustard oil, up 25 rupees a litre in the last 6 months. It's now 170 rupees a litre. Refined oil, up 25 rupees a litre. It's now 160 rupees a litre. It used to be 135. Tur dal, up 20 rupees a kilo. It's at 120 rupees a kilo. So as you can see over there, this price situation entirely untenable, particularly at a situation when job losses are a very real concern. Well, joining us now, Professor Purva Javadekar, Assistant Professor of Finance at the Indian School of Business. We're also joined by Pawan Khera of the Congress, also joined by Rajat Sethi. He tracks political affairs. He's also an economist. I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us. Rajat, let me come to you first, because there's been a great deal of criticism. For example, Mr. Chidambaram today, the former finance minister, tweeted, he said, Mr. Modi's government and LPG prices in 2020 to 2021 from 594 in November to 834 now. The prices have gone up and it's a difficult time. Can the government not do something to try and control this?
I think, Vishnu, there is no denying the fact that the fuel prices have gone up. And since it is an important input cost in various other commodities and food, various kind of food products as well, the overall effect, cascading effect that it has is reflected in some of the statistics that you were showing. But I would refrain from calling it a classic case of inflation wherein the economy is at its potential and there is a scope of overheating. Principally, other than the global prices of fuel going up, the crude going up, and it is being much talked about in even international fora. But what needs to be understood is that there has been supply constraints because of the COVID, which will and should ease out in the next few months, which is going to result in further retail inflation going down. But the concern around fuel prices skyrocketing is something that the central government has to look into. They need to tap into their reserves, which were procured when the global crude prices were low. And I think this is what the concerned minister, Mr. Dharmendra Pradhan, is already working on. So I think we'll have to see how the government strategies play out in the near future in terms of taming the fuel prices.
Mr. Khera, the problem with fuel prices is the taxation structure across the states. That applies to the center, it applies to state governments, including Congress governments. And one blames the other that, we haven't brought down taxes, but you haven't either. So in a situation like this, what can be done to rationalize taxes on fuel?
You see, as far as the central government is concerned, there is an ongoing bone of contention between states and center on the states' share of GST. The states are starved of money. There is no doubt about that. So when it comes to the central excise segment of the fuel that we use, that really needs to be rationalized by the center. My friend Rajat was saying the global supply issue, global prices of fuel are going up. Global prices of fuel started going up now. But between 2014 to 2020, what was happening to the global prices? Why did prices here not come down? So these are excuses which we cannot hide behind. And Vishnu, you touched upon unemployment. While you gave data of cooking oil, LPG, fuel, pulses, all other essential commodities, milk, the corresponding data of unemployment is scary.
Yes,
if you
exactly.
go by the Pew research, 55% of those who slipped in poverty belong to India. Now that's a scary data. So coupled with unemployment, this price rise becomes a double whammy. It becomes a huge issue. Now, the fundamental confusion in the minds of those who run this government, I don't know who runs this government, is when you have to address the demand side, they'll start addressing the supply side. Now, that's not how you handle India's economy, which is essentially consumption driven. So how do you create demand?
I want to just go across to
by putting money in the hands of
sure.
people.
I want to go across
Right
to Mr.
now,
Javadekar.
We need money in the hands of people.
Right, one second, Mr. Khera. You know, I mean, let's talk a little bit more about fuel, because Mr. Javadekar, it's quite clear. I mean, it's common sense that higher fuel prices will result in a cascading effect across commodities. It will lead to a fall in overall demand. It will affect consumer sentiment, you know, in a very quick period of time. We are seeing fuel prices now go up on occasion several times a week. And the international environment is not good. Okay, we accept that. But in a scenario like this, when the economy is particularly vulnerable and people are suffering now, what is the way forward?
So you make a compelling argument, Vishnu. So what has happened is the crude prices went down after the pandemic was, started last year. At the same time, central government and some of the state governments also hiked their taxes. And therefore, the entire price drop in the international markets was not transferred to the Indian consumers. Now, the argument here is that the demand will be sort of cut short when the economy is doing so badly as it is doing now. So a good solution, but one must realize that if government does not mop up the tax on or the duties on the fuel, they will have to either cut down on the social spend, or they will have to borrow more to finance those social spends. So it's a kind of a math problem where you need to understand which side you want to save and which side you want to expose more. So a good economic solution to this problem is when the interest rates are low, like now, and when governments all around the world are borrowing, it's good time to borrow a little bit more, right? And not tax consumers at particularly this point in time. But how should you then solve a long-run problem is when, say, due to excess supply of the crude oil, and therefore when the prices of the crude oil are coming down, but our economy is doing good, and when economy has little bit of breathing room to pay little bit more taxes, you should mop up taxes then, create a reserve, which should be utilized in difficult times like the ones we are going through right now.
I just want to go back to Rajat. Rajat, the inflation data which was released by the National Statistical Office, now that's indicated a rise, a 6-month high. It was driven by price increases across the board. Food, fuel prices took the lead. And so this was something which was actually known. Now this was released several weeks back, and there has been no correction. If anything, it's getting worse. The trends are there for us to see. The government has made a lot of promises in the recent past. The BJP has made promises ahead of elections, and now we are in this critical situation at the worst possible time. I mean, where is the accountability?
No, you are right. I think the wholesale price index was at a 6-month high. But please understand that this was primarily driven by a supply shock resulting from the second wave. It was not a classic case of inflation wherein your economy is running at its potential, and it is because of the overheating of the economy you will see a classic case of inflation. This was a temporary affair, which in my opinion, should once the supply side equations are settled, the inflation, wholesale price index inflation would have come down. We have seen that the food inflation was pretty much benign, even given what was disclosed by the National Statistical Office for the data of May. So food inflation was roughly at around 6%, not too high, but certainly not within the comfort zone of the policymakers. But I think going forward, government has taken cue that they need to tame the fuel prices. There are only two possible ways of doing it.
Yeah.
One is to reduce the taxes, reduce the excise duties that are on the fuel taxes, both by the center and a corresponding effect ensured by the state governments also. Because at this stage, if the state governments are also short on their funds,
but that's just the point, Rajat. This has been discussed ad nauseum, and there has been no rationalization of taxes on fuel at any level.
But if the
and
center
we keep complaining about it. And we
the
know it has a
center does
cascading
the state
effect.
governments won't pass it on to the consumers.
So
and
we are
that
back
is where
to
the
square
biggest
one.
problem is.
But listen, I'm interrupting you only because I have a very little time left. I wanted to ask Mr. Khera one more question. Mr. Khera, to me, one of the worst statistics is actually the cost of a domestic cylinder. In Delhi, that's now at 834.50, 834 rupees and 50 paise. That's gone up, and it's utterly untenable. When we talk about fuel, we talk about diesel, petrol, but LPG costs, domestic LPG cylinders, and the prices they are at are utterly untenable in this situation.
Of course, it's criminal, the kind of price rise of LPG is concerned. Rajat was talking about wholesale inflation. The safety net of the retail inflation as prescribed by the RBI has already been breached. 6 months, it was 6.3%. So let's address holistically, let's look at where all have we gone wrong, and we've really gone terribly wrong in the last 7 years. One after the other, adventurism by this government. In terms of borrowing, Professor Javadekar, I think this government has been the largest borrower too from RBI. Look at how much has this government borrowed. So even in terms of borrowing, this government has broken all records. So you can't say that, the government has to borrow. Government has already borrowed more. Where is the balance? Therefore, I repeat the demand we keep making. Please bring money in the hands of people to trigger demand. That's the only solution left, unfortunately, now.
All right. Increased spending one way or the other in a situation like this. I'd like to thank all of you very much for joining us. These prices at this stage just skyrocketing, even the prices of milk, as you can see now, going up. And the reason for that rise in milk costs is again because it's cascading. Input costs across the board going up. That's what Amul said is the reason of milk prices going up. It points to a wider problem in several areas as far as food supplies, essential supplies are concerned. I'd like to leave it at that. Thank you all very much for being with us. With no signs of COVID being handled at a global level, key questions continue to be asked on the road ahead. The Delta strain is now dominant around the world. There are signs of another surge in parts of Europe, and perhaps the first signs of a new surge in India as well. There is huge disparity in vaccination rates around the world amidst a desperate urge to open up, which is why we are hearing a lot now about vaccine passports. Are these equitable? Joining us now, the Chief Scientist of the World Health Organization, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. Thanks, ma'am, very much for being with us. As usual, lots of questions, many brought in by our viewers. Firstly, when will Covaxin be accepted by the World Health Organization? It's asked because a lot of Indians who've been vaccinated want to ultimately be able to travel with this.
Thank you, Vishnu. Nice to be with you again. So on Covaxin, the company Bharat Biotech had a pre-submission discussion with the WHO team that deals with pre-qualification and emergency use listing. So we are expecting the submission of the dossier within the next few days or up to a week. And from then, it usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks because there is sometimes some discussion between the company and the committee that's looking at the dossier. So we expect that within 4 to 6 weeks that should be completed, the process. Whether or not it gets the emergency use listing is not something I can tell you today. That's up to the committee. But what we will expedite, of course, is the process itself, and that's a set process. And Bharat Biotech is very familiar with it because they have a number of pre-qualified vaccines. So I expect that it should be fairly smooth.
So second week of August, I think it would by then we'd know one way or the other, right?
Yes, we should.
All right. Should the European regulator include Indian vaccines in their vaccine passport? Now, we've seen India get into bilateral agreements with several European countries, but the European vaccine passport doesn't include either Covaxin or Covishield. And that's problematic, if not today, then certainly in the future, once things open up. So shouldn't there be equity in this as well, vaccine passports?
Yes, there should. The first thing I would like to say is that WHO does not promote the idea of vaccine passports. And we have said that consistently from the beginning because of the equity issue. Everyone around the world doesn't have equal access to vaccines, and therefore using that as a passport to travel or trade could be discriminatory. But having said that, we are seeing that a number of countries are moving towards using this type of document. It would make travel easier, I suppose, for those countries where there are large percentages of people vaccinated. And we are now discussing with the European Union the issue of including the Covishield, because it's exactly the same as the AstraZeneca vaccine that's manufactured and marketed in Europe. And so we understand the European Union has left it to individual member states to recognize, and they've encouraged them actually to recognize all the vaccines that have received emergency use listing by WHO. And that obviously includes Covishield. There are 6 vaccines on that list. So that's the request that we have made, that all WHO emergency use listed vaccines be included in that digital vaccine certificate or vaccine passport. I've heard that today a number of European countries have decided that they will include Covishield in the list that they approve, and I hope that all the European countries will do that. So that will really help, especially on travel.
And ma'am, it's very interesting and important that you mentioned that the WHO is in talks with the European regulator as far as including vaccines such as Covishield. What has their response been?
Well, you know, the system is rather complex. There is a European Medicines Agency which makes recommendations for the European Union. But actually, it's the national regulatory authorities in each of the member states that have the authority within their own borders. So it's a country by country approach. And this is for all drugs and vaccine approvals. So, of course, the declaration or, you know, the consensus document that the European Commission or the European Union approves will help member states to make a decision in a particular way. And in that, they do encourage individual member states to accept all the WHO emergency use listed vaccines. So I feel that in the coming days, we may see some progress on that front. As I mentioned, 7 countries have already done it. Today, July 1st is the first day actually of this new system being operationalized in Europe. So I'm fairly optimistic that this will happen for the WHO EUL listed vaccines.
Yeah. And prima facie, ma'am, would you say that the exclusion of Covishield, which is, it's identical to AstraZeneca, was, it was incorrect, it was biased?
Well, we would definitely have liked it to have been included because it's the same vaccine. There's no logic behind excluding it. But if you look at the technicalities, they have gone by the vaccines approved by the European Medicines Agency, which has approved, the particular brand of AstraZeneca vaccine that was submitted to the EMA and approved. The Serum Institute of India did not submit because they do not market that vaccine in Europe. So it's a technicality over there, and hopefully it will be corrected because WHO has the entire data set to show that these 2 vaccines are identical.
And it obviously affects people not just in India, but several countries in Africa as well who've received this vaccine, right? So
Exactly.
it's a global issue.
it is a global issue, and Covishield is in fact the major vaccine that has gone through the COVAX facility. So as you say, a very large number of countries around the world will be impacted by this.
You know, there's so much data which keeps coming in, and every time I interview you, I ask the same question because, you know, the data keeps updating. So how effective are the vaccines against the Delta variant? What is the latest that the World Health Organization can share, given that we are seeing an outbreak in, for example, the United Kingdom, other parts of the world, in Russia as well? What do we know about vaccine efficacy?
Okay, yes, again, it's a complex topic and a huge amount of data that comes out on a daily basis. So it could be confusing to people. I think the good thing is there's a lot of work going on looking at each of the new variants as they are being described and looking at vaccine effectiveness. First, looking in the laboratory. So setting up these neutralization assays that look at how easily somebody's blood or serum, which has antibodies, can neutralize the virus. And those studies generally show that there is a slight reduction in neutralization of the Delta variant, varies from 2 to 4 times less neutralization capacity from serum taken from people who received a variety of different vaccines. However, when you look at the clinical data on effectiveness, it's much more encouraging because what the data is currently showing is that after somebody has received 2 doses of the vaccine, they have a very high level of protection against severe disease leading to hospitalization or death. And while there are surges being reported in countries that have high rates of vaccination coverage, it's because there are still susceptible people in those countries that have not been vaccinated. So there is a pool still of people. And secondly, many of the infections are mild or asymptomatic. And certainly the number of people who have 2 doses of the vaccine who end up in hospital, when you compare to those unvaccinated, is much, much less. So I think the bottom line that's important for people is these vaccines, all of the approved vaccines that we're using today, do protect against severe disease and hospitalization, regardless of the variant that's common. Vaccines do vary in their efficacy, some ranging between 70 to 90% if you look at symptomatic infection. But again, if you focus only on the group with severe disease, then most of the vaccines have shown over 90% efficacy. So really, I think the bottom line and the message is we need to get vaccinated. There is no need really to doubt the efficacy of the vaccines that we are currently using.
Is Delta Plus a variant of concern to the World Health Organization as well?
No, Delta is a variant of concern. In fact, we're not using the word Delta Plus. You know what happens once you have a variant of concern, then it accumulates mutations. We know that, so you will find a number of these variations which occur within the Delta strain itself. So we have the AY1 and the AY2 and so on. So at the moment, there is no reason to think that the Delta Plus that's being called is a new variant of concern that we need to panic about. I think it's important that we don't panic over each new mutation. This is an expected evolution of the virus. I think the Delta variant is very scary because it's very transmissible and it has some other properties as well. And so we do need the genomic sequencing, the surveillance, and a strategic sequencing so that we know which variant is going up or down in different parts of the country. And India is huge, of course, so you need a lot of sequencing to get that kind of picture. And then we know that the measures are the same. So one is the vaccination, of course, that we need to expand and as much as possible and as quickly as possible. And the other are the public health measures. And WHO has been saying, do not take your masks off, even if you've been vaccinated, because you can still get the infection. You can still be a transmitter of the infection, even if you're not getting sick. So everyone should continue to wear masks and keep all the other precautions that we've been talking about. And public health agencies need to keep a very close eye on what's happening within their own states, their own districts, and take action immediately if they see a new cluster of cases arising. So test positivity rates, the number of cases that are being reported on a weekly basis, the bed occupancy and such indicators have to be tracked very closely and preemptive action taken to prevent, community spread and the kind of waves that we've seen earlier.
Just one final clarification. Did you say that Delta Plus, or AY1, I believe that's how it's known, is not a variant of concern for the WHO, and that it may not necessarily be as bad or as dangerous as some people feel it may be? Is that right?
Yes. So
that's great.
Countries can label variants of interest and variants of concern, within their own boundaries based on the data that they have. But the WHO obviously looks at it globally, and this particular AY1, so far the number of cases reported also is relatively small, and we don't yet know a lot about it. But whatever early data we've seen doesn't indicate that it's much more dangerous than the Delta.
All right, Dr. Swaminathan, that's great news actually to end this interview with, and let's hope it remains that way. But thank you so much for speaking to us. It's a pleasure as always to speak to you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Vishnu.